Welcome to Spotlight on Schools. We focus on the Rochester City Schools. I'm your host, Jim Strauss. The New York State Education Department formally approved the Rochester School District's partnership with the University of Rochester for East High School. This comes after years of East High's being identified by the state as a priority school. The most recent four-year graduation rate for East High was 42%. In its proposal to the state, the University of Rochester's Warner School of Education stated this, and I quote, "It is our vision to create a comprehensive urban high school that can be a model for urban school reform. A high aim, a tall order." Chosen to lead this venture is Dr. Stephen Uebbing, a full professor at the University of Rochester's Warner Center for Professional Development and Educational Reform. It's my pleasure to have Dr. Uebbing on today's program. Welcome to Spotlight on Schools.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, Dr. Uebbing has been a superintendent of schools for 23 years. He was named New York State Superintendent of the Year in 1999. In 2009, he was a recipient of the New York State Council of School Superintendents Distinguished Service Award. That's hard to say. He has extensive experience with high-needs schools in various roles. Before we get to the specifics of your proposal for East High, I'd like to address some concerns raised by some previous guests on this program. William Calla, who's a friend of yours, I find out, and Dan Dermesich. Both are experienced educators, both are educational advocates. They both say that unless we address the underlying cultural problems caused by concentrated poverty, the problems that this causes in education will never be solved. They see the answer to this as desegregation. In Rochester's case, a movement towards a county-wide school solution. A recent study in the last couple of months revealed that urban areas in New York State are the most segregated in the entire United States. That's shocked me. Your proposal suggests that we can deal with the problems where they are now. What is your reaction to the solutions proposed by people such as Bill Calla, Dan Dermesich, and even Van White, who is the current president of the Rochester School Board?
I don't think you can argue with those conclusions. We have a educational system in New York State that's based on local school districts. People can go to whatever school district they could afford to live in, and we end up with de facto segregation. Go back to Brown versus Board of Education, we thought we had solved that, but in the following Milliken-Bradley decision, it was indicated that the desegregation only had to occur within a school district, but not between school districts. So each of these school districts is an independent entity, and the courts have no jurisdiction to order cross-integration. So I can't argue with their conclusions, but that's not what this is about. We responded to a request from the Rochester City School District Board of Education to intercede in East High School, given the conditions as they are. We're not policymakers at this point. We're not involved with questions of high stakes testing or the Common Core state standards or ways to integrate school districts throughout New York State. Those are different issues, and we have to essentially play with the cards that were dealt.
Mm-hmm. Well, this doesn't come out of the blue, however. It isn't like you're starting from zero. One of the things that I found on the proposal was that you were involved in a reorganization of the Geneva City School District. I didn't know. I think probably most people don't know. Now, it seems analogous, based on the report that I read, it seems analogous in some ways to Rochester, and the results were very surprising to me. Can you talk a bit about that? You were a member of the Joint Intervention Team.
Yeah, I led the Joint Intervention Team at Geneva High School when they had a graduation rate of 63%. And trust me, we would do backflips if we could get to East High School 63% in just a couple of years. We hope to get do much better than that. But all of the credit at Geneva goes to the faculty, the staff, the kids, and the administration in the Geneva City School District. Our work kind of laid out a framework for improvement based on a agreed upon scope of instruction, an approach to instruction that would be school-wide, better use of time, and they embraced that. They really get all of the credit for that. They did the work themselves. So the Joint Intervention Team that I led included some of the people who were working on East High School with us. We made recommendations to them, and they embraced those recommendations. I've worked in Geneva for some years, but there's very little similarity between Geneva and the Rochester City School District.
Some of the demographics began to approach, which, for example, poverty based on free or reduced lunch. There was 60-some percent?
63.1% as of May 2014. But the poverty levels are in the low 20s. Poverty levels, there's a big difference between poverty and free and reduced lunch. The other thing about Geneva, it's a small, self-contained, small city. It has a substantial percentage of highly educated parents who work at Hobart and William Smith and the Cornell Experiments Center and the hospital. It has about a 54% white population, about 46% African American, Latino, and mixed population. And the level of poverty in Geneva does not come close to the level of poverty in the Rochester City School District. So it might have some vague similarities to what's happening in Rochester, but it's a totally different case.
Okay. So with the help of the people there who got on board, you began measuring in 2009 at 63%. By 2012, the graduation rate had climbed to?
I think they're at 82 right now, and they project to get to 85. And this is their work, not ours. We believe that there are 3 legs to this stool. Leg 1 is having the right people. Leg 2 is using best practice. And leg 3 is capacity, meaning that you're providing substantial support to your people, you're training them, you're developing them, you're working with them, and to develop best practice, you're involving the community, you're bringing parents in, you're bringing agencies in a productive way. And those 3 legs together can create a stool that will be a platform for student success.
And do you see those 3 legs applying to the East High?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So you go back to the poverty question. You asked if I thought anything could be done without solving the issues of poverty. So we in this country have to make a choice. We can choose to continue to have 25% or so of our kids living below the poverty line. And remember, there's a big difference between a child who's living in poverty and a child who's economically disadvantaged, meaning working poor versus probably not working or barely working, meaning generational poverty versus going through some tough economic times. Now, in the Rochester City School District, the poverty level is very high. We can't even pinpoint exactly what it is at East High School. So if we're going to accept that as a society, that about a quarter of our kids are going to live in poverty, and then we have to make a judgment about how we're going to educate those kids. If we're going to accept this segregated, and it is a segregated system of education that we have specifically in New York State, more so in New York State than in the South where they have countywide schools, but specifically in New York State, if we're going to accept that, then we have to ask the question, can we expect the same school inputs that are successful with middle class and upper middle class kids in suburban school districts to be successful with high need kids, especially in urban but often rural school districts? If you assume that the same inputs will create the same outputs, then I think you're unrealistic. So the inputs have to change in high need school districts. And that means a heavy dose of community engagement, bringing parents in, and that means different approaches to education, different approaches to curriculum, different approaches to teaching. That means breaking the mold, if you will. What works in Penfield will not work at East High School. What works at East Rochester will not work at East High School. So we really need to look at this differently than we've done in the past. There are very, very good people at East High School who want only the best for these kids. And the kids themselves are wonderful kids who want to achieve and be successful. So many of the ingredients for success are already there. But it's going to be a lot of work to change a culture, not just in the school, but in the community around school success and graduation.
Okay. Well, let's look at the structure. You had 3 levels. Mm-hmm. Why don't we start with the first one, the lower school? Tell us about that.
So we intend, and all of the work we've done thus far, and I guess today's date is the 16th of July, I want to emphasize that, is preliminary. We're still gaining input from stakeholders. We're still developing our thoughts. We're still framing exactly what this is going to look like. We're getting great support from Rochester Teachers Association members who are now part of our committees, more so than they were in the past, from parents who are joining our committees, from agencies who have jumped in and provided us input and support, from the school district itself. We had a great meeting this morning with members of Bohan Vargas' staff to try to move some of these things forward. So at this point, we're still moving past the preliminary and into the proposal stage. We do an actual proposal, final proposal to the New York State Education Department sometime in December, and we'll make a presentation to the Board of Education in mid-December. So given that, at this point, we're seeing the school in 3, if not 4, discrete entities. The first we're going to call the lower school. This is a traditional middle school. Right now it's grade 7 and 8. We're having serious discussions about adding 6. We see 6 as a potential time to really develop literacy. 7th and 8th grade middle school years in New York State are very much prescribed, but you have more you have more flexibility at 6th grade to create a deeply embedded literacy model that involves all the subject areas. And most of the kids coming to East, 78%, I think was the number last year, have literacy issues at level 1 on the state testing. And level 1 would imply they're below basic and they're going to struggle with schoolwork. Level 2 would imply they can actually do schoolwork. They'll be fine. Level 3 would suggest they can do very well. So we have to move kids from level 1 to level 2 just to get started. And that's why we are seriously considering including 6th graders in the plan. They'll have essentially a school within the school. They'll arrive at a different time than the older kids. They will not come in contact on any regular basis, at least, with the older kids. They'll have a true middle school experience with a flexible schedule, with emphasis on integrated learning, bringing the technology, math, and science into a single spear, if you will. We're not going to fight the battle of the Common Core state standards. We're going to do the Common Core state standards. We're not going to fight the battle of high stakes testing. We're going to do the high stakes testing, but we're not going to focus the school on getting ready for the spring test. It's not going to be a testing factory. Kids at our school will have the same kind of preparation for those high stakes tests that kids in any suburban school have. They're going to focus on their learning and their development while they're in middle school, not getting ready for the test. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have what we call the upper school. Now
Well, let's stick with the lower school for just a
lower
minute.
school, okay.
Honorable Soler, the principal of the school, said in defending his 42% graduation rate, he cited the fact that, as he identified it, that 3% of entering freshmen were competent in both math and reading. 3%. So the focus will be on getting those skills up by 9th grade.
Developing those skills.
Developing those skills. The other thing that I noticed in your proposal was that hopefully that these kids in the lower school will develop some, well, that's in the freshman, no, in the lower school will get some high school credits as well.
Sure. I mean, if you look at what's happening in school districts all over New York State, kids leave 8th grade with 2 or 3 high school credits. I was superintendent in Canandaigua. Most of our kids left with a load credit language other than English. Many left with business communications credit. Some left with math and science. Which brings me to the 9th grade academy, because if we can have kids enter 9th grade with a couple of high school credits and leave 9th grade with 5 or 6 high school credits and at least one of those regions passed, the chances of them actually graduating in 4 or 5 years goes up exponentially. I mean, they've had the success experience. Rick Stiggins, who I consider to be the foremost expert on assessment in the country, will tell you once you develop those winning streaks. By the way, Rick Stiggins is a graduate of Canandaigua Academy. I want you to know that.
Oh, you take pride in that?
Well, he graduated before I got there.
Oh, okay.
But once you develop those winning streaks, then kids don't see the coming challenges as beyond hope, and they tend, and as a former teacher, you know, as kids succeed, success breeds success. So the 9th grade academy will be a very separate, independent, discrete unit within the building. They'll come at a separate time, They'll build up their own esprit de corps. They'll have their own rules. They'll have their own administrator. They'll have their own social worker and counselor. And they'll do all kinds of team building activities just around their success. We want to see these cohorts about 180 kids.
Okay.
We're not going to
pause
have
for a
anybody
second.
leave. Everybody who's there stays. But as the years go on, we'll admit about 180 kids a year.
Okay. We've reached the end of the first segment. When we come back, I want to talk about another aspect of the lower school and the freshman academy, which is one of the goals to ensure decorum and focus. Okay, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Spotlight on Schools. We're talking with Dr. Stephen Uebbing, the professor at the University of Rochester's Warner Center and the upcoming superintendent of the East High School. We've been talking about the breakdown of 3, possibly 4 parts of East High. We talked about the lower school, which is essentially a middle school, and we began talking about the freshman academy. And I would like to address the one of the lines in the description of the lower school, which talks about a school-wide approach to ensure decorum and focus, which essentially deals with behavior. And I taught middle school for just this long, and I realized that in the best of worlds, middle school is a challenge. Within the inner school, I've heard lots of horror stories. Can you tell me what that line, what you mean by that?
Middle school kids expend more energy by 10 o'clock in the morning than you and I do in a week. And they're going through many, many changes, developmental changes. They're still going through brain growth. They're going through all kinds of issues with their bodies and their emotions. And so they present certain challenges and opportunities in an educational setting. There have been very successful approaches to dealing with all kids. One is an approach called PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention Systems, in which every person in the building uses the same system to enhance student behavior. Research-based indicates that when it's done with fidelity, it'll be successful. I have a lot of background personally with a program called Leader in Me, in which kids learn about, this is based on the Stephen Covey literature, and kids learn those principles and they apply those principles in their lives.
That's the 7 Habits of Highly
That's
Effective
correct.
People.
The other thing that is important, very, very important, is to give students a voice in the school. It can't simply be that, do what we tell you to do and do it because we tell you to do it. The more you give students a voice in their own education, the more likely they're going to own it and they're going to take responsibility for it. So, character development is a key component of everything we should be doing, everything we do and should be doing in public education. And we can never make that a secondary goal. Character development has to be a primary goal of what we do with all kids, especially younger kids.
Also, in the description of the lower school, it talked about a high-quality curriculum that involved cultural relevancy. Would that engage kids more? You say that it's very prescriptive for 7th and 8th grade. You want to?
Well, the middle school course offerings, the program of study for middle schools is state pretty much prescribed by the state. Right down to 3/4 of units of this, a half unit of that, and so forth. The more integration you can do, the more culturally relevant you can make it, and that doesn't detract from the rigor of the curriculum. It can be every bit as rigorous, but we certainly don't want the kids at East High School being presented with, what one dead white male author after another, and although we certainly wouldn't ignore good old Bill Shakespeare, I think that we need to make their education, and it has to relate to their lives and then link their lives to the larger world they live in.
Okay. Let's move on then to the freshman academy. One of the things that we didn't talk about is extended time. Would you care to talk about that?
So we intend to offer a program of extended time for all students, and it'll look different depending on which level you're at. The older kids who are struggling, especially when we first get there, we have many kids who are overaged and undercredited, extended time around course recovery, around catching up and trying to graduate. We're going to enter a situation with 11th and 12th graders that will have a fairly heavy failure rate dating back to 9th grade. And so extended time for them will be around how do I catch up. Another aspect of extended time, I mentioned there are actually 4 units, will be East Evening. We'll have an evening opportunity for kids to get caught up in their credits, kids who have failed and want to get caught up and want to graduate. So that's it's different than extended time after school. Middle school kids will have a different feeling about extended time. It'll be enrichment. It'll be an opportunity for them to be engaged differently in the curriculum. I believe, as my friend Bill Calla believes, that school should be fun. It shouldn't just be drudgery. And most of us, when we go out into the workplace, we try to enjoy our work experience, and kids should enjoy their school experience. So maybe this extended time yet to be developed will be opportunities for kids to grow in ways that they're not going to experience in the standard curriculum. At 9th grade, our goal is to as great extent as possible, move kids from 9th to 10th grades with some high school credits, being ahead of the game on what we call the Gateway Regents examinations, which are 1 science and 1 mathematics examination. And I'm sure some of that extended time will be focused on making sure we achieve that goal.
Okay, let's move on to student support. There are a number of things that you're talking about. I don't know how much of that's in place. I know that you've talked about having, there's going to be a guidance counselor at each grade level. There'll also be a social worker at each grade level, but there are also other things in place, for example, a student support center. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, we were talking off camera a little bit about the trauma that kids who grow up in poverty experience in their lives. And for families that are watching the show from suburban communities, the level of trauma that kids undergo or are subjected to often before they even come to school is remarkable. And the impact on the development of their brains, the development of their personalities is considerable. And so we have to recognize that when a human being grows up in trauma, they need different levels of support than when they grow up how my kids did, in a really lovely suburban-like community. And the issues that they face need to be dealt with, and supports need to be in place. And these are not only supports for the kids themselves, but sometimes for their families. So we're hoping that we could be one vehicle to bring the community together around supporting not just kids but families who have experienced trauma, kids who've experienced really sometimes, I was at a presentation where a young man who has graduated from the East and gone on to get his master's degree said that I'd have to use both hands to count all of my friends who have been murdered by gunshot. And this young man himself had been shot. Go to any suburban school district and find anybody who's experienced that level of trauma. You're not going to find it. These kids need a different level of input and ongoing support than do kids in the larger population. Also,
one of the things that is new, or at least different, throughout the 4 levels is what you call a family. Daily family meetings. Can you talk about that?
So kids, actually this is probably true for adults as well, kids need a sense of belonging. They need a sense of belonging beyond their own peer group. And they need a sense of development within the school. So we intend to organize the school into multiple groups of very small families, 5 to 7 or so students, with a caring adult who knows each one of those kids as part of the family. And we intend to develop a curriculum that goes along with those small groups that does several things, works on getting to school. I mean, attendance is a huge problem, and until we solve that, we're not going to solve anything else. Study habits, getting organized, presenting oneself. We are going to work very, very hard. We have some great contacts with the business community to make sure that our kids are doing internships, have summer jobs, have jobs that will prepare them for the world of work. And we intend to work in these small families about developing the skills kids need to be successful in the world of work. how to create a application, a resume, how to present yourself for an interview, how to attend to the work that once you're on the job, what's expected. We intend to use these small families for deep levels of social development and social support, and to link kids with other supports in the community already. There are great community agencies ready to help link them with those resources through the small family effect.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned in the document that there will be a comprehensive closed loop referral process. Now, I'm not sure what closed loop means in this context.
That's kind of a technical approach and a counseling term.
Yes.
And I would really defer this to our counseling specialist.
Okay.
Than rather.
Does it mean confidential?
I mean, it's always confidential.
Okay.
Students have an absolute right to confidentiality protected by federal law.
Mm-hmm. Well, it says, by way of further explanation, it says available extended hours and beyond the 10-month school period. Right. And these services are also connected with the school-based health center, which the School of Nursing at the U of R has been running since, I think it's 95. Yep. It's available not only for the students, but for their families as well.
Well, at this point, it's only available for the students.
But I'm understanding there's talk going on that possibly.
That's a separate proposal. That'd be great. This is primary care we're talking about. So these people who use these services are seeing a nurse practitioner and have access to full primary care facilities. And the problem is that any school program that ends on June 21st and doesn't start again until September 1st is missing, a big part of the lives of those kids. And everybody knows that students lose a little over the summer, especially students who have just gained it. But they lose in the social development standpoint as well. And so you can't ignore the emotional, social issues that kids have over the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Or you'll pay the consequences when they come back.
Mm-hmm. We have about a minute and a half left. This talked about involving families. It said elsewhere in the document that you're going to give preference to people who are in the community. You talk about making the building open for community. Community is a big part of that thrust. You'd mentioned one of the legs of the stool. Mm-hmm. In about a minute, talk about the importance of community.
So if you think about, a young boy or girl comes to school at 7:30 and is done at 2:30 or 3 o'clock. But the rest of the time, that's 5 days a week for 40 weeks, but it's only 180 or so days a year. So most of their time is spent in the community. And you can't expect to provide the support and behavioral modifications and academic intervention services that children need just in school. If this isn't a school-community partnership, it will never be successful. So your first question to me in the interview was, can we succeed without reversing issues of poverty in the community? I would say we can succeed if we have the full support of parents and the community on behalf of their children.
Okay. Well, we're out of time. We'll come back and talk when this December 14th is the date for the final plan, right?
On that date, we have set that as our date to submit it to the Board of Education.
All right. Let's come back and talk then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Uebbing. Okay. Thank you for watching Spotlight on Schools. We'll see you next time. Good night.